Lit Ladies.
I'm Christie.
I'm Kelly.
And I'm Carissa.
Three writers and moms exploring how to live out our faith in our literary lives.
We span the country from the coast to the Midwest. And with different stages of life, careers, and favorite genres, we're sure to cover the literary landscape.
In every episode, we'll discuss books we love, reading life, and writing craft, using the Bible as our guide for beauty, goodness, and truth. New episodes drop every other Friday.
Hello and welcome to the Lit Ladies podcast. We are so excited to have you all join us once again. And today's episode is actually a bit of a unique one for us. We will be breaking it up into a few parts due to logistics. So we are thrilled to have our writers group join us to discuss some writing tips. Just a quick background. Our writers group has been together for roughly 8 years. We live all over the country. We've got Texas, Florida, Kansas, North Carolina, California, maybe a few others in there. So we are scattered, and due to time zones, we had to record at different times. So we actually started a tradition a good handful of years ago with a JaNoWriMo. So many authors or aspiring writers know of NaNoWriMo. It's a November writing commitment where writers will commit to writing a certain amount in the month of November. And somewhere along the line, someone had the idea that holidays were crazy and we should start a JaNoWriMo. So our writers group spends the month of January setting goals, writing, accomplishing the goals, and then checking in just about every day. So tonight you get to hear our writers share their tips. So we're so thrilled. We have Darcy Fornier with us today. And Darcy, tell us a bit about yourself. What do you write?
So I write young adult medieval adventure. It's kind of like a light fantasy in that it's set in a fictional country or alternate history. But there's usually no magic in the stories that I write. I typically focus on teen-aged characters and try to write stories that appeal to multiple ages so that a family could read them together. But I want like a lot of adventure so it keeps you interested. Usually medieval, and of course the medieval setting. Castles, must have castles.
Must have castles. And are you published, Darcy?
I am. I have one novel independently published. It's called The Crown and the Axe. It released in 2019. Available on ebook and paperback. I was super proud of that paperback because I formatted it myself.
Ooh, yeah, that's a challenge. And we will put that in our show notes for any of our listeners who would like to read that. So how long have you been writing?
So I've been taking writing seriously since about 2013, right after I graduated high school. I actually wrote the very, very earliest draft of this novel back in 2009, I think. So it was a long time coming, but yeah, the very first story I wrote was when I was 6 years old, and it was 3 pages long in a miniature composition notebook, like 3x5, and it featured 2 of my stuffed animals. I've since lost it, but that is my very first story.
Aww.
And if I'm doing my math right, you're saying you started in 2009, but you graduated high school in 2013. So were you a freshman in high school when you started this story?
I guess I was. Yeah, that would have been 9th grade when I was buried in physical science. But yeah, I took 2 days, one day, and after I got my schoolwork done, I was just writing as hard as I could. And it was just notebook, paper, and pencil. But yep, that was the beginning.
I love that.
Darcy, I'm curious. So what drew you to the medieval setting? Was there a book that inspired you?
Absolutely. The Sleeping Beauty fairy tale.
Okay.
That was what got me into it. I love the medieval setting because there's, such a great opportunity for adventure. But yes, it was inspired by a fairy tale, so that kind of set it for me.
Well, yeah, all the romance and
exactly.
The quest. Yeah.
Yes. The princesses, the prince. Actually, the book focuses more on the prince, but, they get to do the fun stuff sometimes, so.
So are you a plotter or a pantser? And actually, before you answer, Carissa, can you explain the difference between a plotter and a pantser?
Okay. Well, a plotter is someone who plots out their story from the beginning, and they will have usually a pretty heavy outline. They know how it's going to end. They maybe outline each scene, and they plan it all out. But then a pantser flies by the seat of their pants, and sometimes they call them a discovery writer, and they just kind of will just start a story and see where it takes them. So, yeah.
All right. So what are you, Darcy? Plotter or pantser?
I'm a planser.
Yeah, that's
That's kind of like the cross between them. Some people use that term. I generally have an idea of where I'm going. I do know roughly what the ending is going to be. I know a few stops along the way. But I'm open to, meeting new characters, introducing adventures that I didn't see coming, and sometimes even completely changing the plot. In the book I'm currently working on, I thought that one character was going to die, but instead he's living. So now I have a love triangle that I am having fun with. That was not planned. But so yes, definitely lean more toward the pantser side for sure.
Darcy is very good at grammar, and she edited a short story for me, and I posted a picture on Instagram the other day. She's like, I see your character. I'm like, yes, I killed off his fiance, and I decided he needed his own romance story. Anyway, you don't know what's going to happen.
You don't know what's happening. Characters may live, characters may die,
Yeah. I've had whole characters appear in a story, and they're like a very important story to the plot, and I had like no idea. I did not plan for them to be there.
It's so bizarre, right? How that happens. All right, Darcy.
Absolutely.
When in the day do you write?
Usually at night, actually. I do my best writing kind of late at night, usually curled up in my room by myself, with terrible posture, all the cliches. That's when I do my best writing. If I have a day when I have nothing else to do, then I will sit down with a notebook and just spend like the whole day pouring through a story. But that doesn't happen very often. So usually at night.
Okay. All right. And be honest on this, because I think sometimes the perception is that writers write every single day. How often do you write?
When I'm in a writing groove, it's probably about 5 days a week. These days, I don't write very often, so it's more like once a week that I'll actually make time for it. So, yeah, it varies depending on like what stage of writing I'm in.
Yeah. I love that you said when you're in a writing groove, because I think that's actually a fair point. I don't know, Krista, if you experience this too, but do you go through seasons where you're writing a lot and then seasons where, I don't know, maybe life hits you more and you're just kind of backseat on writing?
Man, not really on purpose. I'm pretty much like, I'm just ever since having a kid, it's like I really just have to protect my writing time, and that's kind of like my time. I just do it at the same time every day, at least on weekdays, and I just, even if I'm just in such a routine, I guess, that I just do it every day at the same time, whether I have like something like with a deadline or not, I just do it.
Okay, I cannot wait to get to your interview, and I'm going to drill down on that a little bit more. Okay.
It's going to be fun.
Okay, Darcy, what?
It's so interesting, different people's,
100%. So
routines,
different for
I guess,
different writers.
yeah.
And
Styles.
I think one of the things you don't realize is how solitary writing is. Like a lot of jobs or hobbies, you're with other people. With writing, you are on your own and you create these unique connections like we have, but very rarely is it in person. So you have to figure out what works for you. So one of the things I see people talk about a lot is the writing program they use. Some people use Microsoft Word, some people handwrite, some use Scrivener. There are probably other options out there. What do you use?
Usually Microsoft Word. It's just easy for me to pull up a document, and I actually got pretty comfortable with it, in high school and stuff like that. So it's just easy for me. Sometimes I will use different fonts for different stories to help me kind of sink into the world. So I use Constantia for my Sunland stories, and I will use, just other random fonts, usually a serif font. I cannot stand a sans serif font.
Me neither. I do not know why I care so much.
It's just, it doesn't look pretty,
Right,
and it needs to look pretty to help me somehow. So that's usually what I use. Early on in my story drafts, I'll use a pencil and paper because it helps me with discovery.
Okay. I love hearing people's thoughts. I've never, ever in my life heard someone who is particular about their font to get them in a specific headspace. I love that. I've never heard it, though.
Oh, no, this is so true. Have you ever tried this? Writing in Comic Sans when you can't get your brain going. It's because it looks so weird. You can't take it seriously, and so you're not taking yourself seriously. And it works. It really does. I couldn't get going
kind of
and
unlock that creative.
Yeah, you just like, it doesn't really matter. I'm just, I'm writing in Comic Sans. It's not serious. And then once I got it, what I was doing, once I got into it, I just changed it to regular.
Oh, I'll have to try that sometime. Yeah. It does matter. It just, well, at least for some brains, it does.
Yeah. This is good. These are tips that I think people need to hear because it's not a straight and linear way of doing this. So,
yeah, everything can be different for different writers and successfully. Like different successful writers may have wildly different processes. So it's cool to see what other people do.
I think so too. And you can get some best practices and tips. Like I'll try Comic Sans. That's it, right? Comic Sans?
Yes, okay. Comic Sans.
Comic Sans. Yep. Okay. What about, there are a lot of writing tips out there. You get these like inspirational quotes that you should do if you're a writer. Are there any general writing rules or practices that you don't do that haven't worked for you?
I think one is the don't edit in your first draft, because if I leave a plot hole, it will block me from continuing the story. I think that has to do with being a pantser. If what's behind me is not working and I know it's not going to stay, then how do I know that what I'm writing forward is going to work either? Because it might be building off of something. So for me, I'll do some light editing. Like I'm not trying to make it perfect, but definitely I want my characters lined up. If I'm going to have to tear this story apart and fix it, do it when I'm only halfway through and then write forward from there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, like you might rewrite something because it's a change you have to make, but when you rewrite, it might go a different direction than you expected, just like we talked about. So then, yeah, that's a great point.
That is a good point.
Exactly.
Very good point. So what is the hardest part of the writing process for you? There's drafting, there's editing, there's plotting. You're self-published, so you've actually gone through the actual formatting. You've done the marketing. So what's the hardest part for you?
Marketing, of course. It's getting a little bit better as I slowly learn like what the concepts of marketing are. That part, it's like it can have an appeal. But yes, marketing is the hardest just because I'd rather be writing than posting something on social media or even blogging sometimes. It's like I'd rather just play with the story. But as far as the story part itself, probably drafting, because that's both my plotting and the drafting. Once I'm in the editing phase, I'm having so much fun because I've got something to work with and I'm making it the best it can be. So I actually have a lot of fun with that. And formatting is a lot of fun too because you get to make it pretty.
Oh, see, I love these thoughts. Okay, so we all know life can get stressful, whether that's finances, jobs, weather, family, etc. So how do you manage writing when life becomes stressful?
I don't, if I'm being perfectly honest. I have not figured out like a rhythm that works really well for me, whether, if life is demanding my full attention, then unfortunately writing does kind of fall back for me. But the one thing that I try to do for myself is I'll write by hand because that just unlocks the creativity for me. And I will pick a story that I'm not pressuring myself about. So it's just something that's fun, maybe that I really connect with emotionally for whatever reason, maybe a romance, which is not typically what I write. There's usually a little romance in my stories, but they're mostly adventure. So maybe I'll pick a romance and just, dive into those emotions and just kind of write for fun. That kind of can help me get back in the groove after I've, had a stressful period where I haven't been able to write.
Yep. And I love that honesty because that's how you operate and that's great. That's what works for you. So what tips would you give someone who wants to write a novel?
It's so hard. There's so many things you could say. I'm not sure what's the main piece of advice I would give, but maybe the best thing with a novel is try to keep it as short as you can. Let the story have as many words as it needs for sure. So don't be cutting things that just for the sake of it, but also try to keep it short because I feel like it's easier to add things and flesh things out than it is to cut things. So I don't know, maybe try to keep it tight.
Okay. I like that. I like that. And those are our pre-formatted questions, but do you have anything else you would like to add on the topic of writing or tips or anything along those lines?
Find what works for you. And a lot of people will say that, but it's so true. You will pick one thing from James Scott Bell, and you'll pull another thing from K.M. Weiland, and you'll pull another tip from Stephen King, and you'll find what works for you, which is, of course, going to mean a lot of experimentation and just, kind of following your gut. But don't let anyone tell you that this is what you have to do, because that may not work for your life.
Speaks. Don't listen to someone who speaks in absolutes.
Yes, that is right. Because there's always an exception.
Yeah, I've heard that don't edit your first draft advice so many times, but it just depends on the person.
Yep. And how your brain works.
Absolutely. How your brain works. Yeah. Figure out what works for your brain and roll with it. It's really cool.
Yeah.
I have a question, Darcy. Do you have any, maybe not advice, but like techniques for character, fleshing out a character or figuring out their character arc? Any like tips or tricks that's worked for you?
I've tried doing character interviews, but that doesn't necessarily work because sometimes my characters are secretive and they don't want to talk. My villains, especially, they're like, "What? Tell you my plan? Heavens no!" So I kind of just write scenes with the characters. You could do throwaway scenes or just kind of understand that the first scenes you write with your characters, they're introducing themselves to you, you're introducing yourself to them, so to speak, and you're kind of getting that rhythm. So those first scenes that you write with your characters, they may require a ton of work if you keep them, or they may get thrown away. But that can be good, is actually throw them on the page, watch the way they interact with each other, and see what's important to them and how they think. Another thing that I find helpful in getting in my character's head is think about the job they have, because that influences the way they look at the world. So I have a character who's a shepherd. So a lot of his similes are thinking about shepherds. The scripture points that are important to him are stories of David, stories about shepherds from John. So if you think about their job, then they might make similes that only make sense in their head, but that's them. That's who they are. So that's been something that's been fun for me with my characters.
I love that. Yeah, I think you and I maybe have similar writing processes or like brain processes, because I think that's one of the things that helps me as writing, just like starting, even if I'm not exactly sure everything about the story yet, I just need to see like if it has legs. I've heard some authors use that term
That's
before,
a good
but
phrase
it's like, are these characters gonna take me all the way there? And I have to get to know them and write several chapters before I can go back and plan the rest of it.
Yeah. For sure. I can maybe be like 10 chapters in before
thing.
Yeah, probably a pantser thing, You're like, you know what? That first line in the first chapter, that's going to be totally different because that character would never say that. But, you figure that out by the 10th chapter.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Yeah. By the 10th chapter. Oh, Darcy, we're so grateful for all of your tips and thoughts, and we all love you, and we're so glad we're in the same writers group. So thank you for your time.
Yeah,
thanks for having me. Yeah, I always love talking about writing and story, so it's been fun.
Darcy also has her own podcast.
Oh, this is true.
You might have heard her on.
Yes, I co-host with Kylie Woodley at the Historical Bookworm Show, and we interview so many wonderful authors of Christian fiction. It's usually Christian romance, and we also share some book reviews and share bits of history, fun stuff.
We'll also add that in our show notes so that everyone can listen to that podcast as well.
Yes,
okay.
They might find a new favorite author.
They might. Or a new favorite podcast. It could go either way.
Exactly.
All right. We now have Carissa Riffle, one of our lovely co-hosts on the Lit Ladies. And Carissa, tell us a little bit about what you write and how you got started writing fiction.
I write a lot of fantasy, but I've dabbled in lots of other genres to kind of get there. And I still think some of what I write might be considered magical realism. Like Darcy, I really like that fairy tale influence. I even done a little bit of science fiction in my day, although I'm not sure if anyone will ever read those. Like I might never publish those, but they were super fun to write. How did I get started? I've talked a little bit about it on the podcast before, but just as a kid, kind of like Darcy as well, just like carrying around a notebook, and it was just what I liked to do. That's just how I escaped, and I just had started then and basically never stopped.
And how long have you been writing then? Since you were a kid?
Yeah, since I was a kid, I kind of took a break in college just because of all the work, but I would always go back to my book in the summer and, maybe I should look at this again. This was really fun. And then after I graduated, that's when I started taking it seriously again.
I love that you started with the notebook that soon because I probably dreamed up more stories. I love that you've been writing that long. That's awesome.
I do too. I can just imagine you as a little girl carrying your notebook around.
Little nerdy girl with glasses.
No, it's just my favorite story of you is your birthday party when you made your whole class wait to have cupcakes because you were reading a book. That's my absolute favorite. I love it.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Okay, are you a plotter or
I was special. I would say I'm actually the same as Darcy. I'm a plantser. I realized I tried so hard to be a plotter because that was advice that everyone said. You have to plot. You have to plot. You have to know your story. And it took me several books before I realized, you know what? I think that I just need to trust myself. And there's a lot of the story that I discover while I'm writing. And I might just have to change gears and just go with it and just be okay with going back and revising a little bit. Recently, I've been, when I outline, what I really know is character. And so I know, what is the character arc? How is the character going to end their story? Like, how do they start and how do they end? What is that crisis moment, that turning point for them? And then the rest of the story follows them. So as long as that's kind of planned out, everything else just kind of falls into place.
So how do you get to know your characters? You would ask Darcy that question, but now I'm curious how you get to know them.
I will start, if I know enough about the premise of the story, I'll just start writing. And then I just get a sense of like how they think and just like the texture of the world, and the writing style is different for each story. And then I'll go back and explore more of their character arc, where they're really going. And I asked I got some good questions at a workshop one time. And it's basically just like, it's actually for pantsers, and you're supposed to be able to ask yourself these questions and just write. But I kind of use it to outline, and it's just asking, like, what does your character think that's wrong? What do they want most in the world? What do they think that's wrong? And then that kind of helps me realize, okay, what do they realize by the end? What is the truth that they need to know?
Hey.
Yeah.
All right. This next question, I really want to hear details on. When in the day do you write? Tell us everything.
I write at about 6 a.m.
Okay.
Every morning. So I get up. Ideally, my alarm goes off at 5, but I have this like natural wake up at like exactly 5:40. And so I'll get up out of bed about 5:40 if I'm doing well, and then like get my coffee and my food, and I'll write for an hour before I get ready to go to work. And and the weekends I'll do it during that nap time if I'm not too busy.
And do you write every day? How often?
Yeah, I would say every day. It's easier to keep it consistent on work days, on weekdays, but honestly, pretty much just every day, unless something like we're really, really busy or we're going on a trip, something like that. I don't feel right if I don't write. If I go too many days in a row without writing, I start to be like really grumpy.
Yeah.
And I could just tell that I haven't written.
It's
weird.
Interesting. I mean, it's maybe weird to someone who's not a writer, but you're talking to writers. So I think Darcy and I probably think that's totally normal. We're like, it's your therapy. It works. Yeah.
And I think I flip-flopped. Like I used to be a night owl when I was younger, but now I think okay in the morning. Probably it's not my peak energy time, but it's just what I have. So I've gotten used to it, and I have food and coffee, and I wake up just fine.
Yeah.
It's quiet.
It works, and you're consistent, which is what is important. So what writing program do you use?
So I have the fancy Scrivener. But I haven't used it for a couple projects. It's not that I don't like it. I guess I have to start a Scrivener project, I have to tell myself, oh, this is a very big novel with a capital N. But if I'm just on a Pages document, which is like Word for Mac, I can just tell myself I'm making notes, I guess. And then I can access it through my phone. So then I can just like be always writing if I want to. And I don't have that for Scrivener. But my current project I'm revising, I might copy it over to Scrivener for revision purposes. Just makes it a lot easier to find the chapters.
Yep. As you go back and forth, that makes sense.
Yeah. Just kind of basically, if you haven't used Scrivener, it just organizes the chapters into folders, and then you can have separate scenes. Has a really nice full screen, like dark mode. There's other stuff you can do with it too that I'm sure I don't use, but
it puts a little more pressure on you.
I guess. Yeah. And it's just the accessibility. Like, I just love being able to pull out my phone and open up Pages and just keep writing and
fair point.
Add to it. Yeah.
That's actually smart, especially when you're on the go and you're a parent. Like, you might get a couple minutes when a baby falls asleep in the car and you might want to write at that time. So that makes sense. All right. What is the hardest part of the writing process for you? Plotting, editing, drafting?
I hate revising. I hate it. It's like you have to tear your story apart, and it's like now this thread that connected to this other thing now it's like dominoes. Like you change one thing and now it all falls over, and it is so frustrating.
Yep.
But I know I'm like I feel like I'm the only person who doesn't like revising. My favorite part is drafting.
I agree with you, actually.
And
I don't
a
like
lot of people
revising.
hate that. Yeah, it's just the fun part is the part of the discovery and like putting it on the paper and just like enjoying the story, not breaking it apart.
Yeah, the fun part is building the sandcastle, not tearing it apart to remake,
exactly.
right?
Or what is the metaphor? Who uses it? Is it Stephen King? He's like shoveling sand. No, it's somebody else. Into the sand box so you can make castles.
Oh.
So like really when I'm revising, I'm making castles, but it's hard to think of it that way.
And I've heard people say, just get sand in the sandbox. Like, just get words on the page so that you have something to work with. So sometimes...
Which is good if you're blocked, you know?
It is.
That's a good thing to tell yourself. Just keep going.
I've actually often told myself I will write 20 words. Like, if I'm totally blocked, my goal is just 20 words. And generally, if I do 20 words, I can keep going. I'm like, I'll do 20 today. So... Okay. How do you manage writing when life becomes stressful?
Honestly, writing is like how I manage my stress because it's just such an escape to me. It's, I just feel better once I've done it. Sometimes there are times when like writing is the stressor, and then I need to kind of I think what Darcy said is just like do something that's fun, like writing something that I enjoy. So that's difficult sometimes. But yeah, I think even in some of the most stressful, hard times of my life, writing was like what got me through it.
So maybe the advice you disregard is pick a project and stick to it because you have multiple ones you can hop between when you need it.
Yeah, that's true. I think there's a time when I was like, I'm trying to force it on this project because I knew I needed to get writing in. I need to get words in. This was going to be the next project. And it just wasn't working. And then I was like, I just need writing to be fun. And so I just picked a different project that I was excited about. I wasn't as planned out with it, but I just started and then I finished it in less than a year. So I guess it worked.
Exactly. You got to trust your gut.
See, Darcy picked up on the tip that doesn't work for you, the general one. So there you go. You didn't even have to answer it. That's perfect. Okay. What tips can you give to someone who wants to write a novel? What would you say to someone?
There's just so much writing advice out there and so much good writing techniques that are also good. But I would say, like, you can teach yourself anything. Then my advice would be, like, if you really want to write a novel, just do it. Life is against you. Life does not want you to write a novel. And you will find 1,000 excuses. So, like, at the end of the day, you just have to decide to do it and stick with it and just finish it. Finish something. And then you'll know that you can.
Yep. I love that.
Yeah.
It's inspirational. All right. Well,
and never stop learning, too.
That's a good point. Yeah, we're always learning.
Yeah, that's my sub point is like never stop learning. We have the internet,
Yeah.
Yes, it's all there.
Yeah. Christie does chat GPT for everything she needs help with. She really does.
You know, put it to good use, right?
I can't tell you the number of times we're like, what would be a good title? And she's like, here are 8 of them from chat GPT.
That's putting it to good use. Don't have it write the story for you, but definitely have it give you hints for how to write the story, you know? Whatever it takes.
Pass me up.
All right, Kelly, tell us about what you write and how you got started.
Okay, well, my name is Kelly Borjas, and I write romantic suspense. My heart beats for the romance. I love love stories. They're my favorite thing in the world. And I started writing fiction when my oldest son was 18 months old. I was reading all the time, and I was basically a stay-at-home mom, and my husband was studying for the bar exam, and he was gone.
Oh, that's so tough.
All day long. And so I needed something to do with my brain and just decided I would start writing a book, and I have not looked back since then.
Love it.
So how long, is that when you first started, like, ever trying to write a book, or?
You know what? I have been writing in some form or another my entire life. I've always loved, I mean, I was a communication major, so I actually liked writing essays, and then I wrote for my high school newspaper, and somewhere in there I've done church blogs. But the first time I started fiction was then, aside from maybe a few sentences I wrote my senior year in high school and decided to give up because I didn't know how to do it. So, yeah, probably. So that would have been 2014 would have been when I started writing fiction.
Cool. Yeah, I think fiction is just a different beast than nonfiction. Like, no shade, because I do nonfiction too, and it's still hard, but like, fiction is so different.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a different part of your brain.
It is.
It really is.
Yeah. I did a lot of journaling. I don't know if either of you did journaling. I used to journal all the time, and I quit that. I don't know why, but I don't do that anymore. So.
Same. Yeah, that fell off.
Yeah, it's like all the energy is going toward the novel.
Yeah.
all the writing energy.
I just use my fiction to get out what I'm working on in life, right? Instead of journaling it all, I'm like, my character is going to go through what I'm going through.
True.
It's true. It's totally true.
Totally true. Whatever philosophical concept I'm thinking about, it just like appears in the story. Like,
wonder how that happened.
Okay.
Yep.
So are you, Kelly, a plotter or a pantser?
You know, I think in general, I lean more towards plotting. However, I never know who my bad guy is. I write romantic suspense. I don't know who my bad guy is until I'm in the story. And a lot of times I will kind of plot an act. So I'll like do the first act and then stop and see what I need to do next, and then do the second act and kind of reevaluate. But I did just start a story with no plotting whatsoever. So I'll see how that goes.
Oh.
We'll see.
She's going to come to the dark
You
side.
might bring me to the dark side. I know. We'll see.
That's a good idea to reevaluate. I think I kind of do that a little bit.
Yeah. It kind of just gets me through those hurdles. And then I'm like, okay, these are the things that need to happen in the next portion of the book. So kind of works, I think. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, breaking down the big goal into manageable goals.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I kind of know like where I want it, like word count wise, how many words I want. So if I think my book's going to be a certain length, I'll do like, okay, act 1 is like 15% of that. So I'll kind of have that target goal, and that just helps me.
Oh, wow. I can never estimate word count. I'm so bad at it. I'm like, this will be 2,000 words for sure to get all this detail, and it's like, 500 words.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, oh, this will be a super short scene. And then to communicate everything, it's like 2,000 words. I'm like, how did that happen?
Yeah. Well, and I will say I've written some stories where I think these various, pieces of information will come to light, and they come a whole lot sooner in the book than I thought. And so I have to pivot and come up with something different. So.
But what about your writing routine? When in the day do you write, and how often do you write?
Well, I guess like Darcy, when I'm in a good season of writing, I would say I write probably 5 days a week. That would be like a good season for me. And actually, if I'm really going to write, I have to get up at 5 in the morning before my household is up. So kind of 5 in the morning would be my ideal time. Sometimes I'll write in the afternoon when my little one is napping. So those are kind of my 2 times. And I'm dead to the world at night. Like, don't talk to me. I'm done at nighttime. So.
Same.
So morning or nothing?
Morning or nothing, yeah.
Do you use a special writing program?
Okay, I have become converted to Scrivener. I actually really love Scrivener, and I'm not that good with it. Like, I don't use all the fancy features, but I would say if anyone is serious about writing a book, it really helps me because a lot of times I'll write out a scene and I'm like, oh, I've got to delete something. And I'll just highlight part of it and put it in like the side note area. And for whatever reason, it helps me. I'm like, well, I didn't really delete it. I can use it later. So I do that a lot. And then just for editing, I don't think I can go back to editing in like a Word document anymore because if I'm looking for a chapter or I'm looking for a word, it's just so much easier for me. So
that's the part that makes it so much better. And I forgot about the notes on the side. So you can say like, oh, I need to communicate. All of these things need to happen in the scene, and it's right there for you.
Oh, yeah. And then like in this book I just started, I wrote myself a question like, do I want it to be rival gangs that were involved in this? So it's like a question for me. I just can put it there and I can see it visually. So I'm a fan of Scrivener. It works for me.
Maybe I need to try it again. Are there any writing tips that don't work for you?
Yeah, I think the write every day doesn't work for me. Like it can at times, but I think at times I've questioned, like, am I a real writer if I don't write every day? But the reality is I've got a lot of things pulling at me in life, and sometimes I just can't make it happen. So I can always hit goals. If I need to hit a goal, I can hit it. But that might mean I have to go get coffee on a Saturday morning and sneak away. It may not mean I can do it every day. So I just have had to learn to be flexible, I think, with myself.
Yeah. Have grace with yourself.
Yeah.
What is the hardest part of the writing process for you?
Oh, the revising. I think it's the most boring for me.
Yes,
and
you already know the story.
I already know the story. I like when the world is fresh. The ideas are plentiful. I just like the world is my oyster. I love that part of writing. I love the dreaming part, and the revising just feels kind of tedious to me.
Same. How do you manage writing when life becomes stressful?
Well, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just have to say, like, it's not happening. Other times I have to just, kind of like you, Chris, I have to protect that time in the morning. So if I can get up at 5 and like drink coffee and read my Bible and then have an hour of writing, at least I can accomplish something. And I have found if I start my day, I can generally start a scene and then come back to it later. So like if I get it started, it's a lot easier to come back to it than if I just have nothing on the page. So
just get that ball rolling right in the morning and get
well,
your
also,
brain in that mode.
Yes.
Yeah. And if you do it first thing, if you've already written for the day and you can tell in your mind, you're like, check the box. Now, whatever crazy thing happens today and I don't get writing in later, it's like, well, I've already written at least a little bit.
Totally. And a lot of times
just helps my brain.
A lot of times I'll be out and about and I'll be like processing what comes next, like working through a plot hole or whatever. So I'll type it into my notes or Marco Polo, one of you guys, and be like, what about this? And so that tends to work for me. But yeah, I mean, I've got 3 kids. My oldest one just had an injury. I've been stuck like homeschooling him. The reality is sometimes life happens and I'm having to work with that too.
Yeah. So what tips can you give to someone who wants to write a novel?
I would just say start. And maybe don't feel like you have to know exactly what you're doing, but just start and then you can change it because it really is easier to edit something that's there than not at all. So I would just say you start with an idea and you get those words on the page and you see what works for you and what doesn't work. And then you can revise it.
So Kelly's advice is start it and my advice is finish it.
Yep. That's it. I agree.
Those are the 2 most important points because, without that, you can never have a novel. You have to have point A and you have to have point B.
Yeah, there you go. Who knew? That's the secret.
There it is.
That's it. And I remember like my first book I thought was so good. And now looking back, I think I'd be mortified if anyone read it. I mean, I still have that story in its like 100th iteration. So I think the basis of the story was okay, but my writing was not good because I didn't know what I was doing for fiction. Even if you know how to string sentences together, putting them together to make a story is challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the word level is one thing, and then the story level is a different skill that you have to build.
Oh, yeah. And there's a lot to writing that I never realized. The pacing, how you end a scene, how you do dialogue, how you set up the world. Like, there's a lot there. But if you just start it, you can continue to learn it and kind of keep tweaking it, and then you can improve.
No writing is ever wasted. That's what... I don't know who said it, but I have to like say that to myself.
Oh, I love that. I've never heard that. And I think that's so good. That's so, so true, Carissa.
Someone compared it to playing scales on the piano. It's like you wouldn't play the scales for performance, but you play them because they're good for your exercise. They're good for your musical theory. They're throwaway notes, but they improve your skill. So writing's the same way.
Oh yeah. Like there's a book on writing called Writing Down the Bones, and she compares it to basketball. Like you need to think of writing as practice. We would never think about a basketball player would never play a game without going to practice. And it's the same with writing. That's why it's so good to have the crappy notebook, as she calls it, and just have something that is not a fancy journal, and you're not going to feel like you can't write in it, and just write like your worst ideas and just write everything in it, and something will stick.
I love that.
Yes.
I love that. Oh, I have one other piece of advice. I would say find other writers, because that has been a game changer for me. Like trying to do it on your own is really hard, but even on our podcast, an episode like this, here we are all chatting about writing, and guess what I just want to go do right now? I just want to go write because I talked to my writer friends.
Yeah,
so I think it really helps.
You know, God made us that way. God made us for community, and he made artists for each other. You just can't create art in a vacuum. Like I tell my students, like, why do we have all these like literary groups? The Inklings, the Bloomsbury group, like the Knickerbockers. Like, why do they just find each other? And because they need each other.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for your time tonight. Part 2 of our recording and our NaNoWriMo tips, and we will go ahead and talk to Stephanie Goddard. Stephanie, tell us your name and what you write, and then how you got started writing fiction.
Okay, I'm Stephanie Goddard. I got started probably when I was really little, but I didn't really pursue it, forever after that. I did always have like ideas going through my mind with my imagination and everything. And so then I didn't really end up doing a lot of writing other than a little bit in high school. And I just really had like stories inside me, and I wanted to write them. But then, I got married and had kids, which is a wonderful section of my life. And I just, it was a great thing to be part of. And that wasn't a time for me to be writing. So then after our kids grew up and were out of the house, I kind of was like looking for something to do, and it just kind of came back to me as, oh yeah, I've always wanted to do, to write. So I just started writing, and so I just wrote, and sooner or later a whole novel came out. And so that's pretty much, it was like an empty nester kind of thing for me.
I love it. And fun fact, way back in the early days of Scribes, when we were first, starting with ACFW, Stephanie and I critiqued each other's work, which is super fun because it's been so many years since then.
Yeah. And I think we probably both started in the group around the same time, actually.
We did. Yes. And that would have been probably 2013. So it was a while ago.
Yeah.
And what genre do you write, Stephanie?
So far I write contemporary women's fiction. Not really too much historical, just all pretty much contemporary, and some romance.
Okay. And I think there's something unique about your writing, so I want you to elaborate a little bit on it. How old are your characters typically?
Oh, yeah. Well, most of them are older than 50, I'd say. So, yeah, I mean, that's been kind of neat because I haven't seen a lot of stories that feature characters that are older. So, and I think there's so much we can offer as older adults to people who are approaching that age, or people who are already, that age, and they're kind of like, just looking for fiction stories that will just resonate with them, or that they can be, fed by, so.
Older characters who have had a little bit more life experience behind them. Yes.
Yeah.
I love that about your writing. I think it makes you really stand out as an author.
Thank
you. You're welcome. So are you a plotter or a pantser?
So I really feel like I started out as a plotter. And in fact, the first couple stories, I just wrote them all out, and I just kind of didn't really have a big plan. I just wrote until they were done. And then I kind of started learning about plotting. And so a couple of the shorter stories that I've done more recently, I did use some plotting techniques, and I kind of like it, but it's harder for me. So I guess I'm maybe a hybrid.
Which is funny because I think that's kind of been everyone's consensus so far in my interview process. So
Yeah.
when in the day do you write? When do you find time for it?
Yeah, most of my writing is done very early in the morning, before anybody else is up, and it's quiet in the house, and I can really concentrate. And I like morning. I'm a morning person, so I'll get up, super early before the sun, and just I'll just write until I can't write anymore. And then, if I'm editing, I can do that in the evening because it doesn't require that kind of creative part of my brain. So, yeah.
Okay. And how often do you write?
I was writing every day. Like when we did our January writing month, I would just write every day, and just even a little bit each day. But like lately, I haven't been. In the summers, we have a farm, so it's been super busy during the summer, and it's hard to make the time to do it. But I think I'm in a little bit of a slump right now too, so that doesn't help things. But my goal is to write every day. I'll put it that way.
Yes. And that's a question we'll talk about later, is whether you write every day or whether you take breaks or how life comes with seasons. So do you have a writing program that you use?
I have typically just used Microsoft Word, and then this year I decided to try Scrivener, and I don't have anything, any stories on Scrivener yet. I just started one, so I'm trying to feel it out and trying to learn how to use it. And so far, I think the reason I decided to try it is because I kept having to switch between documents, or something so that I could remember what my notes were about, the characters, or about what was going on, or the plot, or something like that. I thought if I could have it all kind of in one place, it'd be easier. So.
Okay, but you haven't done enough of it yet to have a gauge on whether you like it?
Right, yeah. I don't know yet.
Okay. Well,
but I think I'm going to like it.
Yeah, that's what I think, but maybe we'll come back next year and see what you think on it.
Yeah.
All right, so as writers, there are a lot of general tips out there. Some people say you have to write every day. Some say don't edit while you work on a project. Are there any pieces of writing advice that we hear often that don't work for you?
Well, I can't say that I write every day. So maybe in that sense, it doesn't work, because I try to write every day, but it doesn't always happen that way. And some of the plotting ideas I have looked at don't really I can't plot the whole story, kind of thing, and then write it. I have to plot for a while and then write for a while. So maybe that, but.
Yep. And I love hearing how everyone does things, because it's always so different. So I think that's one thing I would hope our listeners who are interested in writing take from these interviews, that we all have a different approach and it works for each of us, which I love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah. What's the hardest part of the writing process for you? Drafting, editing, plotting, another part of it?
I think plotting is the hardest. Like right now, I'm trying to plot a story, And eventually I just say, you know what, I can't keep doing this. I'm just going to start writing because that comes easier for me. I like the creative part better. And I don't mind editing because I usually have like a direction I'm going with it, and I can kind of use more of the logical side of my brain. So.
Okay. So just the plotting part's the hardest.
Yeah.
All right. So interesting.
Yeah.
All right. When life becomes stressful, how do you manage writing?
Well, apparently I just stop, but I don't know. That's not probably the best way to do it. But no, I guess you just have to balance what things are important, in everyday life. And sometimes other things do take priority. So, and you just have to know that. And also, I mean, I have to step back and, allow God to remind me why I'm writing and that kind of thing too. And it helps, to get through either the writing struggles or, other everyday life struggles, and, just how he, calls us and how he's with us, through everything.
Absolutely. So why do you feel that God has you writing? I didn't prep you with this question, but I want to know what your thought is.
Yeah, I just know, like, from just, life, how things happen and that challenge our faith and that challenge, that are things that people go through. And I want to bring hope to people. Like, I want to bring the thought that, God is in control, and there's hope, and there's, reconciliation, and there's forgiveness, and there's all kinds of things that we can gain. And I kind of, like, I think of it like my platform, in a sense, like, because I'm not one to go, preach at a pulpit or something, but I want to bring the gospel to people, and that's like my number one reason.
And a lot of times it's through story that people can understand or hear something differently than they would have just in a straightforward way. So, okay. So what tips can you give to someone who wants to write a novel?
I just really have one main tip, and that is to join a critique group, because when I first started out, I just didn't really have any knowledge. I didn't go to school for it or anything. So I didn't really have, a lot of knowledge about fiction writing and what makes a good story or anything. So when I first joined the scribes group, it helped me so much, because I just learned so much out of it, and I'm still learning. And so I would say that would be my number one tip.
That's a good tip. And if anyone's curious, the way to do that, you can go to ACFW and become a member, and they have a scribes critique group there. And then oftentimes those scribes groups will break into smaller groups that form. And that's what happened to our group. And it's been a lot of years now. So yeah, that's a great tip, Stephanie. Is there anything else you would want to share about your writing journey for someone who's interested? Any other tips, any other piece of information you'd want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that you have to realize that writing takes, it takes a while. Like, it takes time. There's, I didn't know it when I first started. I thought, I'll just write these stories and then I'll just have a book or something, I just didn't know what the process was like. And I've learned a lot but it's okay, because if God's calling you to it, then, you'll have, it'll come to pass. So.
That's very well said, and actually what I needed to hear, because it is a very, very long process, and it's not overnight for most of us, and you have to keep working and honing your craft and spending the time. And I don't know, I think really you only continue with it if you have a passion and God's put it on your heart, because otherwise it's a long process. So
yeah, it's so true.
Well, thank you, Stephanie, for your time. We might have you back on sometime to talk more about some of your writing, but we really appreciate your writing tips today. Okay, and next we have Christie Kern, our other lovely co-host of the Lit Ladies. So, Christie, tell us your name and what you write and how you got started writing fiction.
I'm Christie, and I got started writing fiction. I just had having this dream, and it was kind of like I'd wake up in the morning and I'd want to finish the dream. So I would kind of fill it out in my head and just let it keep going until it was like this story. And I have referenced this story before. It is like the atrocious trope of the babysitter, the nanny falling for the man's kid, or the man whose kid she's watching. That makes a lot more sense. Yeah. And so then after that, I just kind of kept going and kept writing stuff. But I will say, and we had this conversation earlier in the week, is that I thought I wrote romantic suspense, but now I think I may just write romance with some mystery in it, which is a little bit of a revelation for me that I'm still reeling from, but it's okay. I'll get through it.
You're still reeling from that. We're all still trying to find our place. And I have to read this quote that was going around social media this week because Christy and I talk about this all the time. Okay. It says, the best use of imagination is creativity. The worst use of imagination is anxiety. And I think half the time that's what you and I talk about. We can at least channel that anxiety into some sort of creativity with writing instead of letting our minds rabbit trail.
Yeah, when I go down the rabbit trails, it needs to be fictional and not real life world. And then things go a lot better.
Exactly. So that might be a little bit of why you write. But how long have you been writing?
I started writing. Okay, now I have pictures of me as a probably middle schooler, early high schooler, sitting on my bed with a notebook and writing. So it was funny because, like I've mentioned, I'm a speech language pathologist now, but then people would be like, well, what did you always want to do when you were a kid? I'm like, I don't know. And then I randomly was thinking about it a couple years ago, and I was like, I used to write. That's what I wanted to do, And so obviously I quit writing at some point. And then I started back probably 2005, but it was just for entertainment reasons. For myself, no one was ever going to read these stories. And then I kept writing, and then I discovered Christian fiction. I really liked it and thought, maybe I could do something like this. And then I found ACFW and then joined Scribes, met you people, and the journey continues.
I love it. And are you a plotter or a pantser?
Primarily, I would say that I'm a pantser, but I have been using a spreadsheet more often. I took an online class with Gabrielle Meyer, and it was just a short little 30-minute hour class. And she was showing how she uses a spreadsheet to kind of map everything out. And she writes 1,000 books a year. Not really, but it's close. But that's how she does it because she's super organized. And so once she plans it out, she can just zip through the writing portion. So I kind of started trying that. And the thing that she had mentioned in her class was that she has friends who are pantsers and they always argue about, what's best or whatever. And she was like, but they do so many more rewrites than I do. And it was like a light bulb went off because I do so many rewrites. And I thought, I would probably save a lot of time if I didn't have to go back and do all those plot holes and rewrites. And so I have a very loose spreadsheet that just kind of has a few sentences about each scene in the chapter. And then I've also found if I'm not writing consistently, then it's easier for me to get back in and pick up where I left off instead of having to spend the free time writing, going back and reading everything to figure out where I was.
Oh, I've never thought about that because I always have to go back and reread what I've written. Oh, yeah. See, this is why we share tips because you will get a tip from someone. You're like, this is amazing. When in the day do you write?
Well, since daylight savings time, I've been waking up nicely at 4 a.m. It's been great. So I've been writing then, mostly in increments. Sometimes I write at work. I should mention I am self-employed, so it's not like I'm, writing on someone else's dime. And I write in the evenings. I really don't have a set time. So mostly early in the morning, mostly in the evenings, just whenever.
When you can fit it in. Mm-hmm. And how often do you write?
Ooh, that really varies. Sometimes I'm inspired, and then sometimes I really have to force it. I have found that if I'm consistent it's easier, not necessarily every day, but if I'm consistent, it's easier to kind of keep the momentum going. And then when, like I said, if I outline, it's easier to kind of pick back up where I left off. So I would try and say at least a couple days a week. But since I'm off on Thursdays and Fridays, I tend to write the bulk then.
I love that. It goes back to that idea of tips that certain people have. And some people say, oh, you have to write every day. But some people can't do that. Realistically, with their schedules, it just may not work. So it's a great example of finding the time that you have and making it work for you and your schedule. What writing program do you use?
I use Scrivener. Do I use all the bells and whistles? No. Should I learn how to use it properly? Probably. Will I? Also no. I tried doing YouTube tutorials on it, but all the ones I kept finding were older tutorials for it. So I've had updates since then. I'm like, well, this button isn't there anymore. I don't know what that means. I will say it's excellent as far as keeping my chapters like with little titles so I know what's in them. And then at the bottom, they have like a section for like notes and research. So I'll copy paste stuff from the internet regarding, whatever, medication, how to kill someone. I mean, anything. And then I also will import my Pinterest pictures sometimes so I can have a visual what the person looks like, or I'll make notes in like the little character sketch. Because like Stephanie had said, like I used to have to go to different documents to figure out, did he have blue eyes? Were they green eyes? What was his hair, curly, straight? So I feel like with Scrivener, it's all right there and it's easier for me to keep track of it.
And I'm not sure you are a romance murderer or romance author when you're like, I don't know, I keep track of like hair color, murder information, medicine, like it's a broad spectrum of things.
It is.
All right. Are there any general writing tips that don't work for you?
Like I said, if I write consistently, it keeps me in the story world, but I really don't believe you have to write like every single day. I would also say I feel like a lot of new writers get caught up in this like show, don't tell, don't use the word was, don't write a passive sentence. Like they get so bogged down in that they end up making these crazy sentences that sound like Yoda, myself included. Or they're just like, I remember reading one time, instead of saying the person shrugged, they just said the person moved their shoulders up and then down. And I thought, what? Like it stopped me. Like, whereas if you had used shrugged, I would have just breezed right on through it. And I read a lot. And there's so many best-selling authors that use the word was plenty of times. And it's one of those words like like you just keep reading. But I think a lot of times new writers will get, stopped with having to like make sure they're not using, cliche metaphors and things like that. Whereas as long as the story's there, like I'm in it.
I think that's a good point. And actually, I think that was really discouraging at first. It's like there are so many rules to follow, but then so many people break the rules. So you're like, which is it? Do I follow the rules or can I break the rules? I don't know.
At heart, I'm a rebellious person, so.
Well, I'm a rule follower at heart, so. Okay, what's the hardest part of the writing process for you?
Can I say all of it?
Sure, whatever's honest.
Sometimes I think it's just the headspace. Like if I have too much stress going on at work or with aging parents or just being pulled in all directions, writing is the first thing to be put on the back burner. And whereas reading is more of an escape, but writing can be both an escape and work. So I think drafting and brainstorming is the fun part. Making the Pinterest board is the fun part. Editing can be rewarding, but I think it's more difficult because for that, I need focus. And the older I get, the less focus I have. So I think like all of it, there's pros and cons to every aspect of writing.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So you kind of talked about this just a second ago, but when life becomes stressful, how do you manage writing?
Kind of depends, I think, on what the stressor is. Like if I need to not think about something, then I'm fine reading or writing. As I've gotten older too, I feel like even though my brain is like squirrels on the loose, I feel like I've gotten better at compartmentalizing. And so, and like with the anxiety we were talking about earlier, like instead of going those rabbit trails, I will like physically like make a fist, like Christie, stop. And then I like totally go in a different direction with my thoughts because I refuse to let something just go down those rabbit holes and distract me and make me think things are going to happen that haven't even happened yet. I'm like, Christie, only in your stories do you follow rabbit trails. So that's kind of what I do.
Yeah. That makes sense. And then sometimes you put it on the back burner, and that's just reality. Yeah. So it was interesting because Carissa was saying when we interviewed her, writing is her stress reliever. So she protects that time. Nothing gets in the way of that. Whereas I'm like you, and kind of what Stephanie said, well, everything gets in the way. And the reality is sometimes life is so crazy. I have to put writing on the back burner. And I'm, we're all at that point where we're not on an official deadline. So of course we acknowledge if we had deadlines and obligations and timelines, it would be a different story. But when you don't, you have the luxury of saying something else can be more of a priority. And that's just life. So what tips can you give to someone who wants to write a novel?
I would say stick with it. Because as we have all mentioned, it is a lengthy process for all aspects. The learning aspect, trying to find an agent, getting published, like all of that takes a lot of more time than you probably want it to. And I would say, please don't publish the first thing you write. No matter how amazing you think it is, get some feedback. Go back, and not from your mom or your best friend. Go back to the drawing board. Don't quit. For the love of everybody, please get some feedback on what you have written by a total stranger.
That's good advice. That's very good advice. I said that last night too. It is sound advice. We all think our first writing is so good, and then we get critiques on it and realize how bad it is. So, or not bad, how much work it needs. There's a difference there.
There we go. That's more positive.
Yeah. Those are all good tips. Is there anything else you would want to share with anyone about writing or starting writing or the process?
I think we pretty much covered it. I think as long as you are into it, knowing it's not like something that's super fast. And I feel like it's one of those things that so many people that we started this journey with that are still doing it are the ones that I'm seeing winning contests, or the ones that I'm seeing getting agents because they have stuck with it and they have learned. I think so much about life now is just kind of quick gratification. And that's where you get a lot of these self-published books that aren't great. There are plenty of self-published books that are great. But I think that's where you get some of the ones that are just kind of rushed and put out there because people are thinking they've put the work in, but they don't realize that it's not a couple days or a couple months. Like it's a long time of work. And plus the market changes, the rules change. Think about the books from the 1900s, like so much prose, like so much description. Whereas now people want everything super fast, actiony, and the payoff really quick. So I think you just have to be aware of all that stuff and kind of go with the flow.
I think that's great advice. Yep. Stick with it. Know that it's a long process. It's rewarding, but it's a lot of work. Yeah.
And read a lot.
That's
true. And read different genres because you can find all sorts of different things to add into your writing to make it richer than if you just always read the same thing.
Right. And other common advice is to read inside your genre because a lot of times people will be like, I write this, but I don't read it. You're like, well, you should probably.
Yeah, that's true. Valid point.
Just repeating tips I've heard. So, all right. Well, thank you both for your time. We appreciate it. Is there anything else either of you would like to add?
No, this was great. Thank you for the interview, the opportunity.
Thanks for joining us today on our Lit Ladies podcast. We hope you loved the variety of helpful writer tips from some of our very own writers in our very own critique group. If you have any tips to share as well, find us on our socials. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook at Lit Ladies Pod. We enjoy chatting all things writing and books, and we hope to catch you next time. But until then, we'll leave you with one of our very favorite quotes. Now, there are several quotes we love about writing, but this one echoes so much of what we talked about today, and it's by Louis L'Amour. Start writing no matter what. The water does not flow until the faucet is turned on.